Hi class, today what I'm going to do is I'm going to review what we talked about in regard to collective bargaining in class. And what we talked about as far as collective bargaining was that it is allowed under the National Labor Relations Act and that it is between the employer and the union. And what they do is that they discuss mandatory subjects of bargaining. Okay? So the union and the employer meet over a period of time way out before the former contract has expired, because they need that time in which to research how the contract should change. They need to look at grievances. They need to look at problems that they've had with the contract, and then they have to look to change those. Not to mention all of the work they have to do economically to figure out how financially they're able to afford raises, health insurance, pension, etc., which we often call legacy cost. So first of all, they talk about mandatory subjects of bargaining, and remember that mandatory subjects of bargaining have to be bargained to impasse. And we talked about impasse being deadlock. And why is that important? It's important because of the fact, and I'm going to go over here, that an employer cannot lock out its employees, and that means can't keep them out of the workplace. They can't do that until such time as they've reached impasse. Impasse takes quite a while to reach. And I would advise you strongly that if you think you've reached impasse, that you make sure and consult with an attorney, because it's a very complex thing to understand and it requires a lot of fact-based decisions. Now, permissible subjects of bargaining are not mandatory, but you can bargain those at the table. And I think of permissible subjects of bargaining, for instance, like what products are the employer going to make? How many employees is the employee going to hire? What plants are the employer going to keep open? Which ones are they going to keep closed? As long as the employer is making those decisions for the betterment of the company and not making them to destroy the union, they're permissible subjects of bargaining, and the employer can stop bargaining those at any time. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is economic strikes. What you see is as a contract starts to go towards termination, the employees start to threaten strike, and that's called an economic strike. Now, as soon as the contract expires, the employees can go out on strike. There's just one problem for them. If it's an economic strike and they're doing it as a result of not getting a contract, the employer can hire permanent replacements. That's right. They can hire permanent replacements. They do not have to hire the strikers that are out on strike. If the employees come back from strike, then they can hire them back, but they're not required to. And if the same or substantially similar job is open, the employer is required to put them into that. But if that job is gone, or if they've hired a permanent replacement, then that striker is out of a job. Now, as I talked to you about lockouts of employees, the next thing I want to talk about is in bargaining, what happens is that as you sit at the table, you go through many, many different issues. You go through issues, as we've talked about before, wages, hours, insurance, pension, health care, and you come to some kind of an agreement. And when you come to that agreement, you TA it, and that means tentative approval. Both sides TA it, who are on the bargaining team. And then what happens is that after the whole contract has been TA'd, they go to their respective authority. For instance, if you're the union, under your constitution, you might have to have the whole union vote on that contract, and then it becomes a formal contract. Before that, it's just a TA, a tentative agreement. With the employer, there typically is a board of directors. And so what happens is those that in management that have bargained the contract have to present it to the board, and then the board looks at all the TAs and they give it a formal approval. And only at that time, when both the union and the employer's board have approved it, is the contract binding. All right? So a TA is very important because as you're bargaining, you're not finishing the contract. It's not finished. It's not valid until the authorities over you, if you're the bargainer, have approved it, which would be the board of directors and whoever the union says has that authority. And here I have that for you right here, and that is the formal approval is a vote. The vote of the board of directors, and however the union has set it up. Many times they ask the whole union to vote on it, whether or not they agree with the contract. I hope this helps. Thank you very much.